St. Mary's made a major announcement on Wednesday, a potential sign the Pac-12 is going to be calling soon.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Football season is here, folks. Visit the FanDuel app today, and you can start planning your futures bets now. We got a lot to get to today. We're going to take a look at the best Zags to come from the great state of Illinois. 4 Zags in the Mark Few era from Illinois. We're going to talk about them. We're also going to talk about St. Joe's coach Billy Lang, who quit just a few months before the start of the season. As we know, that means the transfer portal window will open for players at St. Joe's, and that could have some significance for Gonzaga. We'll talk about why in the second segment, but we are leading the show with news out of Moraga, California. The St. Mary's Gaels made an announcement on Wednesday morning, and it could have some implications about their pursuit of joining Gonzaga in the Pac-12 conference. St. Mary's announcement on Wednesday was that they are adding men's and women's swimming and diving, as well as men's and women's water polo as athletic Division I sports starting in the 26-27 season. A direct quote from the athletic director of St. Mary's, Roger Thompson. He said, while many NCAA institutions across the country are scaling back athletics, St. Mary's is making a bold commitment to expand opportunities for students. Our new aquatics program builds on the Bay Area's rich tradition in swimming and water polo and affirms our belief that athletics are a vital part of the student-athlete experience. So obviously, St. Mary's adding swimming and diving and water polo is not going to be a significant needle mover in terms of the Pac-12's pursuit of St. Mary's. This is not the final thing that St. Mary's needed to do in order to get invited to the Pac-12. There was not any athletic directors in the Pac-12 who were saying, well, I'd invite the Gaels, but they don't have swimming. Like, I want to be very clear that that's not what is happening here necessarily. But what is happening is that St. Mary's, in a time, as President Thompson alluded to, in a time where most programs are scaling back athletics, cutting either full programs or cutting the number of scholarships they're giving to certain non-revenue generating sports, St. Mary's is doing the opposite. They're adding to their sports facilities. They're adding more student athletes. They're adding more scholarships. They're adding more to what they do from an athletics department perspective. That's unusual and might be a cause for concern for people who are wondering why St. Mary's is not allocating every single penny that they have to building a new or at least significantly expanding their current facilities. One of the biggest hurdles right now by many people who are involved in the conversation around Pac-12 expansion is that St. Mary's, who is viewed as a logical addition geographically, a logical addition because of the strength of their men's basketball program, the big hurdle for the Gaels is that they are a very, very small institution. They have limited resources, and their basketball facility is lacking compared to the other teams in the conference. Even Texas State, who is not a strong basketball addition for the Pac-12, have a bigger arena than St. Mary's by a considerable amount. And the idea that St. Mary's is allocating funds towards adding swimming, adding diving, adding water polo, which I don't want to sound like I'm anti-St. Mary's doing that. I think it's great. I think more student athletes at schools like this is a positive, good thing. But I wonder if it's going to concern folks that St. Mary's is making this decision as opposed to the money that they could be allocating to. And again, the money that's going to cost them here, they're renting a local high school. They're going to use their facilities in the short term, and they're going to end up building a bigger facility in the long term. But it's still interesting that the timing of this move for St. Mary's, whether it's a move of like, hey, we already got the go ahead from the Pac-12 and it just hasn't been announced yet, but we know that it's going to happen. Therefore, we feel comfortable making this move, whether it's a move in an attempt to get into the Pac-12, and perhaps an ill-advised one if the Pac-12 is not necessarily all that concerned about the swimming and diving numbers. Maybe it's a move of like, hey, we don't think this is going to happen, but we think this is a smart thing for us to do. So instead of making all our decisions based on the hope that we get into the Pac-12, we're just going to do something that we feel is the right decision for our university at this moment. John Canzano wrote a great piece about St. Mary's. He talked about this specific edition a few hours before it was officially announced by St. Mary's, and kind of talked about, again, the resources that St. Mary's may need to allocate towards their basketball facilities in order to get themselves in a position where the Pac-12 will be comfortable adding them. And Canzano kind of compared it to a chicken or the egg situation of what is going to come first for St. Mary's. Is it going to be a financial pledge to make an upgrade to their basketball facilities, which would likely be upwards of $25 million? Or is it going to be an invitation to the Pac-12? So is this a situation where once they get that invitation, then the donors will show up, then they will get the $25 million, then they will start the basketball upgrade? Or is it a Pac-12 saying, hey, you need to promise us, you need to be able to show us that you can get that kind of money, that you can make that kind of upgrade before we even put your admission to our conference to a vote? I'm not sure which one it is. I have a feeling that they're going to be contingent on each other. Like, I do think that the Pac-12 will, if they do ever put St. Mary's up to a vote, they will say this needs to be a part of it. There needs to be a promise. There needs to be some kind of proof that you are going to make these moves, make this growth in ways that we can tangibly prove they are going to do. Otherwise, we don't want to admit you into our conference in your high school gym. Like, that's just not something the Pac-12 is going to be after at this point. We do know the Pac-12 is interested in getting to 10 basketball playing schools. The multiple athletic directors have confirmed that. They are at 9 basketball playing schools right now. They would like to get to 10. From a scheduling perspective, way easier, way easier if you are at 10 schools. And as a reminder, St. Mary's would not be a basketball-only addition to the Pac-12, the way that Dallas Baptist is a baseball-only addition, the way that Southern Utah, by the way, if you didn't see this, Southern Utah is now in the Pac-12 for women's gymnastics. Those are for one sport and one sport only. We know this because Gonzaga, despite many articles calling them a basketball-only addition, that is not accurate. Gonzaga is not a basketball-only addition to the Pac-12. They are in every sport. They just don't happen to have football. The same way that St. Mary's would be a all-sport addition to the Pac-12, they would add baseball. A sport that right now the Pac-12 does not have a very big number in baseball. St. Mary's went to a regional last year and advanced in the playoffs. Like, St. Mary's is a pretty good baseball program. You add that, you add men's soccer, a program that's or a sport that is in dire situations in the Pac-12. You add women's soccer, you add other sports that St. Mary's, whether they're competitive or not, in some cases, Pac-12 just needs more sports, and St. Mary's will give you that. Now they'll give you men's and women's swimming and diving and water polo as well. So this is an interesting thing. Again, the timing for St. Mary's is a little bit unique here. We have heard rumblings. About a week or so, there was kind of a sudden influx of rumblings about St. Mary's. I don't know if something got leaked, if some conversation happened. We certainly have not seen an announcement, and the smoke that we saw about a week ago has seemingly kind of died out until this announcement, which again could be nothing, could have nothing to do with the Pac-12, but I think it's worth at least keeping an eye on. Something else worth keeping an eye on is a recent conversation also by John Canzano, this time on his radio show, The Bald-Faced Truth, where he hosted WCC Commissioner Stu Jackson on the show. Stu Jackson, who I have a lot of respect for because he does not beat around the bush. He's obviously not going to give things away or play his cards, but he also is pretty direct in how he communicates, and I think that's a welcome change for modern kind of college athletic leadership. And he said, here's his direct quote regarding St. Mary's. He said, quote, "I'll say this, St. Mary's has been a very committed member, but I don't say that being naive. In today's landscape, every institution owes it to itself to see what's out there." I think that's a great answer. Stu Jackson has said everything that they have told me is that they are a committed member to the WCC, which of course, St. Mary's is not going to say anything else until there is something to be said. Back at the WCC Media Days in October of last year, I had a chance to speak with Stu Jackson, and he was very direct about kind of the, Gonzaga's conversations with him at that time before they moved to the Pac-12. And he said that, he went and talked to Gonzaga leadership and kind of asked what the number was that they were getting. And obviously Gonzaga did not know, still does not know the exact number, but presumably they had a range that they had been given from the Pac-12. And Stu told us when he heard what that range was, he said, great, thank you. I, respect all you've done for the WCC, but that's pretty much going to do it. And I think that makes sense. I mean, the WCC is not getting huge amounts of money to these programs. And I think this is an important caveat as well. Those of you who have been following this story will probably already know this, but Gonzaga is getting a full share from the Pac-12 media deal. The exact same amount of money out of that media deal that goes to Boise State and San Diego State and Colorado State and et cetera, is going to go to Gonzaga. That is a massive benefit that Gonzaga gets because they can allocate a much higher percentage of that money to men's basketball because they do not have football. St. Mary's will not get that deal. If St. Mary's does get invited to the Pac-12, it will be at a significantly reduced rate. They are not, if Gonzaga is getting, let's say, $9 million from the Pac-12, if that ends up being the media deal, I would expect St. Mary's to get less than 2, definitely less than 3. They're not going to be taking as much money from the rest of the pot. They're not going to get a full share, an even share that these other schools are getting. Texas State is not getting an even share either, even though they also have football. So this is a story that's continuing to be a waiting game. All of Canzano's reporting, all the other reporting out there is that these sides have talked and that St. Mary's is basically just waiting. They knew that the Pac-12 wanted to finalize their media rights deal. They knew that the Pac-12 wanted to get to their 8 minimum members for football. They knew that they were going to look for some additional members to bring in for affiliate schools, sports like Dallas Baptist and Southern Utah. And they're kind of just still in that waiting pattern at this point. It's a story we'll continue to keep you updated on. Obviously, for Gonzaga, having their rival in the conference boosts the basketball in a major way. You then have Gonzaga, St. Mary's, San Diego State, Boise State, 4 of the best schools on the West Coast. You also have great programs like Colorado State and Utah State. It would be a very, very strong men's basketball conference, made even stronger with the addition of St. Mary's. So we'll keep you up to date on this story as it continues to develop. Very news story here going on the other side of the country. St. Joe's head coach Billy Lang quit on Wednesday, which opens up a 30-day transfer portal window. Could the Zags, who capitalized on this with Jalen Warley last year, could they do it again? We got more on that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, it's almost the weekend, which means it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered the most. Let's break it down. We're talking Washington Huskies football. Running back Jonah Coleman delivered in a big way. Coleman had 5 rushing touchdowns on just 15 carries against UC Davis in UW's latest game. When the pressure was on, Coleman came through, no hesitation, no delay. And just like Coleman delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers for you on Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday that you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our conversation about Pac-12 expansion and the St. Mary's Gaels to instead talk about another Saint college, the St. Joseph Hawks out of the Atlantic 10 Conference, because they were the big story in college basketball on Wednesday when it was announced that their head coach of the past 6 seasons, Billy Lang, is quitting his job to go take an assistant coaching job with the New York Knicks. Now, this is not a huge loss for St. Joe's in the sense that Lang went 81 and 104 over the last 6 years, never took this team to the NCAA tournament, had a significant amount of talent, was a great at player development. Rasheer Fleming went from a 0-star recruit to 3 years at St. Joe's to becoming a first-round pick in the NBA draft. Like, this team developed talent very well, but Lang was really unable to get them through in a competitive A-10 with Dayton and St. Louis and other great programs. He was just not able to get this program to break through in the way that a lot of people thought they would. They did win 20 or more games in each of the past 2 seasons, but did not make the tournament. He was considered very strongly on the hot seat, like was one of the most obvious hot seat candidates coming into the season. Most fans that I've seen kind of talking about this on social media have basically said, we were pretty sure he was going to lose his job in March, but it's still becoming a trend of college basketball coaches leaving pretty close to the start of the season. He didn't quite pull a Tony Bennett. If you recall, Tony Bennett retired from his job at Virginia 17 days before the start of the college basketball season. At least in Lang's case, it's about 2 months, a little less than 2 months until the start of the season. But that's still better than 17 days before the season. But it continues to be a thing we're seeing coaches do. We also had Coach Jim Larinaga at Miami retire in the middle of the season last year. And it's being done in part to prevent the entire roster from being overhauled, because these coaches know the rules, the rule being that you have 30 days from the day that a coach leaves, whether they're fired, dismissed, retired, whatever it may be. If your coach leaves, 30 days from that day, you have to enter the transfer portal. If a coach leaves in the middle of the offseason, like in June or July, a lot of those players are probably going to transfer, and then that program is going to have a really hard time filling their roster with other players. So if you wait till September or October, and you leave, those players are kind of stuck. I don't love the idea of coaches intentionally timing their departures to kind of trap players. I know that's sort of an exaggerated way to describe it, but it's how a lot of players felt. More than just Jalen Warley would have transferred from Virginia if Tony Bennett had retired a few months previously. Nobody knows that more than Tony Bennett, which was part of the reason he waited until he did. He admitted it, that timing was intentional in order to help his buddy, the associate head coach, Ron Sanchez, potentially keep the job, even though everybody knew that Ron Sanchez was not going to keep that job. And in fact, he did not. They hired Ryan Odom from VCU after that season. But it's just kind of this icky thing. It almost feels like coaches' sort of response to not having as much control over players, staying in their program every year, of like, well, I can control this and I can leave and I can keep, these guys here. I don't think it's that malicious necessarily, but it's a reminder for folks who don't like the transfer portal. And I get it. I understand not liking that the rosters change as much as they do year over year, but coaches have never had this restrictions. They've been able to leave any job whenever they want, however they want. There's no real restrictions on that. And this is a good reminder of that, like, hey, if coaches have this kind of freedom, maybe it's not such a bad thing that players do too. In terms of how this impacts Gonzaga, every player on St. Joe's roster can now enter the transfer portal from now until basically, I think, October 9th or so. I don't know how many will. There's a good chance not many, maybe a few, maybe guys who were planning to not stick around very long anyway, who were already unhappy with the program, maybe guys who didn't feel like they were going to play after realizing, going through practices. Maybe it'll be nobody, who knows? But again, as we said, Jalen Warley was the only player to transfer from Virginia, and he ended up at Gonzaga with the intention to redshirt, because Gonzaga loves the red shirts. They love this. Warley admitted he did it because once he realized his likely path here was redshirting and playing, his final season in 25-26, he wanted to go to a program that develops talent better than anybody, and he chose Gonzaga because of that. It stands to reason that there might be players at St. Joe's who feel similarly. Right now, Gonzaga's roster is full, but because they have designated student athletes via the House settlement, they can add more players to their roster, and they will just have to get their roster down to 15 next season. So they have room on the roster. We also, as of right now, do not know the status still of 6'7" wing and Grand Canyon transfer Tyon Grant Foster. Gonzaga has to keep a spot available for him, of course, but if they feel like this continuing to drag on could be a sign that the NCAA is not going to give him eligibility, and a player who plays a similar position potentially becomes available, again, this player might redshirt if they were to leave St. Joe's at this time, but it's worth considering what Gonzaga might do here. There are 3 players on St. Joe's roster. Again, nobody has entered the transfer portal at this point, so none of these players are currently, as of this recording, available. But if any of these 3 players did enter the transfer portal, I think it would make sense for Gonzaga to pursue them. Most notably on the list is Jaden Glover. The reason is because Gonzaga already pursued Jaden Glover. When he first entered the transfer portal, he was a freshman at St. John's last year. When he first entered the transfer portal, Gonzaga was one of the schools that reached out and contacted him. He ended up, of course, transferring to St. Joe's. 6'5" guard, did not play much last year for the Johnnies, just 2.5 points per game in 22 games, about 6 minutes a night. Rick Pitino doesn't play freshmen all that much. That's traditionally true, but he was a top 60 recruit coming out of high school. Very, very good scorer at 6'5", decent positional size. And again, a player that has already been in contact with Gonzaga. If Jaden Glover enters the transfer portal, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Gonzaga truly pursues him. And again, whether it's to get him a role right away, if Tylen Grant-Foster is eligible, there's not playing time to be had between Adam Miller and Mario St-Superi and Braden Smith and Emmanuel Innocente and Jalen Warley and Steele Venters. There's not playing time, and Davis Vogel for that matter. But maybe Glover could be a redshirt, and then when Warley graduates and when Grant-Foster graduates, you have some playing time open up in the wing. Perhaps he could be a guy who fits a bigger role the next season. Next up is Al Amadou. He's a 6'9" sophomore forward who has also not played at St. Joe's. He transferred to St. Joe's from Marquette, which is where he was as a freshman. Only played 14 games his freshman year at Marquette. Just 1.2 points per game. He was 8 for 11 from the field. Could be a developmental power forward option. I think with Parker Jefferson on the roster, I feel like Gonzaga is maybe not as needy for a power forward. I think they need a power forward who's going to be able to play big minutes for them right away this year, especially if Grant-Foster is out. Al Amadou is probably not that guy, having only played, again, basically like 40 minutes in college basketball for Marquette last year. But he's a 6'9" power forward with some high major experience at Marquette, so at least worth keeping an eye on. And then last but not least is Justice Ejagbor, 6'11" senior center. He would need to redshirt. I don't think he wants to spend his final season of college basketball playing for a team that he joins in mid-September, the way that Jalen Warley did not want to do that. But Justice is a guy who's been very productive. He spent 2 years at Harvard, last year at St. Joe's. Last year averaged about 5 points, 4.5 boards, and 2.5 blocks. And his junior year at Harvard, he averaged 8.5 points, 6.5 boards, and 3 blocks per game. Justice is one of the best shot blockers in college basketball, period. And for Gonzaga, if he decides he wants to redshirt, wants to transfer somewhere, spend a year learning the ropes, and then play for them the following season, Gonzaga makes a ton of sense because Graham Ike will be out of eligibility after this year. And if everybody else returns, that would be Braden Huff, that would be Ismaila Diani, that would be Parker Jefferson. You still have room for more bigs on this roster. And a player who's a senior, a player who's played in the Ivy League and the A10, a player who's blocked more than 2 shots per game in each of the last 2 years would be a phenomenal fit for Gonzaga. If Ismaila Diani is ready to take the leap and is awesome as a junior, great. He starts, Ejagbor comes off the bench. If Diani's not ready, this Ejagbor comes in, potentially starts right away for this team as a rim protector. These are the 3 players that I think potentially should have their eye on, the Gonzaga fans should have their eye on, should any of them choose to enter the transfer portal in light of their coach, Billy Lang, leaving to take that job with the New York Knicks. Well, folks, we're closing out the show. 4 Zags in the Mark II era have come from the state of Illinois. We talked about one of them already. 2 of them currently with the team. One of them is one of the best guards in program history. We're going to rank all 4 of them as we've been doing the last couple of weeks here, coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else as of August of 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Because with Mazda, every drive feels like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, Mazda sweats every detail. Because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a cannot-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you like to bet, whether that's player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to get a little bit more energy into your Sundays. Want to talk some Zags future bets here? Graham Ike plus 5,000 to win the Wooden Award. If you think he's going to be the best player in college hoops this year, might be worth checking out. Plus the Zags plus 3,500 right now to win it all. You could also parlay the 2 of those if you're feeling real good about Gonzaga's chances this year. Make yourself a whole boatload of money. Folks, if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. All right, folks, continuing our series here to close out the show, talking about the best Gonzaga players from each state in the Mark Few era. We've been doing this periodically for the last couple of weeks here on Locked On Zags. So this will be our fifth different state that we've talked about. We started with Oregon, ranked the top 10 players in the state from the state of Oregon. We talked about the 3 players from Colorado, the 3 players from Idaho, and then the 4 players from Minnesota, all in previous episodes. And today we're talking Illinois. We're going to do Washington. We might have to break Washington into 2 different shows, maybe the west side and the east side of the state. We'll do California, we'll do Texas, we'll do Arizona. There's some other states that we might get to as well. And if we have some time, we'll do the best players from Canada, the best players from Europe as well. Obviously, for Illinois, Chicago is a big basketball town, and Gonzaga has recruited successfully in the city of Chicago, in the state of Illinois as well. 4 players in the Mark Few era from the state of Illinois, 3 of them who began their careers directly at Gonzaga, one of them who did transfer to Gonzaga a little later in his career. We're going to talk about the 4 of them here, ranking them in order of how productive they were, basically ranking them in my opinion, of the best players out of this group. This was a pretty easy one, although I think that there is a possibility this list changes in a couple of years. But we're going to start with the guy at the very top of the list, Chicago's own Jeremy Pargo. Jeremy Pargo spent 4 years at Gonzaga, the only 4-year player on this list. 134 games total in a Gonzaga uniform from 2005 to 2009. Started 103 of those games, averaged about 9 points, 4.5 assists, 3.5 boards, and 1.3 steals per game. He was the 2008 WCC Player of the Year. He was 2-time All-WCC, also 2-time All-WCC Tournament Team. He led the WCC in assists per game twice. He also led the WCC in total assists 3 times. Basically, he was a full-time starter for 3 years at Gonzaga. All 3 of those years, he had the most assists in the conference. 2 of those years, he had the most assists per game in the conference as well. He also averaged 10 or more points per game in 3 of his 4 seasons at Gonzaga. The reason his career average is 9.3 points is because as a freshman, he only averaged 2.7 points per game, even though he played like 32 games that year. Jeremy Pargo is 4th in school history in total assists, just 2 assists ahead of Ryan Nembhard, which is crazy because Ryan, of course, spent only 2 years at Gonzaga. Granted, Jeremy was only a full-time player for 3 of his 4 years, but that's still a wild stat there. Pargo also 5th in school history in steals and has had an incredibly lengthy professional career. He's played in the NBA, he's played in the G League, he's played in at least 7 different countries overseas. He most recently played in the Big 3, which is Ice Cube's 3-on-3 basketball league. He played for the new Detroit club and made the All-Star team last month. Very, very long, productive, fun-to-follow career for Jeremy Pargo, and he is an easy choice for the best Gonzaga player in the Mark Few era to come from the state of Illinois. Number 2 on this list, I mentioned in the teaser that there are 2 players from Illinois who are with Gonzaga right now. One of them is Zach Norvell. Zach Norvell, obviously no longer still playing for Gonzaga, but he is an assistant coach with the Zags and was in fact out recruiting last weekend, talking to a player from Milwaukee named Dooney Johnson. So Norvell out there still spreading the good word out in the Midwest about Gonzaga basketball. He spent 2 years. He technically spent 3 years at Gonzaga, but he redshirted. So he played for Gonzaga for 2 years, 2017 and 2018. 74 games in a Gonzaga uniform, started 65 of them, averaged about 14 points, 4 boards, a little under 3 assists per game. He was the 2017-18 WCC Rookie of the Year and, of course, also on the All-WCC freshman team. The next year, he was the 2018-19 All-WCC first teamer. He also led the entire conference in made threes that year with 97 triples that season. He had two games in his career where he scored 28 points. He had 28 points in a road win over Creighton. He also had 28 points in a round of 32 win over Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament, the year that they lost to Florida State. That same year, he also hit a clutch 3 to secure a win over UNC Greensboro, one of his more iconic moments. It was kind of a no, yes, okay, we're happy he shot it type of shot from Zach Norvell, Snacks, as he was called, of course. What a great career. I know a lot of people feel like Zach should have stayed at Gonzaga longer. And with hindsight, of course, not getting drafted in the NBA, only playing very briefly at that level and then having injuries, maybe that's the feeling is that, if he'd stayed at Gonzaga, maybe he could have boosted his draft stock, done what Corey Kispert did, maybe. But also, Zach Norvell's injuries maybe would have happened anyway. And he may have stayed in college, gotten hurt, and never had a chance to play professionally. I think about that a lot with him because I think a lot of people assume, if he'd come back to school, it would have been better for him because it didn't work out for him. Therefore, coming back to school would have been the better choice. And again, maybe. I'm not saying it wouldn't have been, but if his knees were going, his knees might have gone. And this was an era where you didn't make money in college. I think now Zach Norvell might have come back to school and made, over $1 million. But at that time, it was I either go professionally and start making money, or I come back to school and potentially risk, lowering my draft stock or getting hurt. So Norvell's a player that I've spoken about this a handful of times because I don't think it's as simple as, well, it didn't work out, so he made the wrong choice. It's always a little bit more nuanced than that. And having Zach back around the program now on the coaching staff, working with these guys, really, really fun. Really happy to see him back with this program. Next up, number 3 on the list is the one that I mentioned that could change this order in as little as 1 year from now. That would be Braden Huff. Braden Huff from Glen Ellen, Illinois, from just outside of Chicago in the suburbs, of course, has been at Gonzaga for the last couple of years. 2 years active, was here as a redshirt 3 years ago as well. All told, Huff has played 70 games in a Gonzaga uniform, started just 4 of them, although we know that 3 of those were to close out this last season, has averaged 10 points, 3.5 boards in 15 minutes per game. That's it. That's all. He's only played 15 minutes per game on average in his first 2 seasons. He was on the WCC all-freshman team 2 years ago. He led the WCC in 2-point field goal percentage that year at 70.1%. He also has led the WCC in games played in each of the last 2 years. And of course, he's in line for a much bigger role this upcoming season. He's going to start alongside Graham Ike. If he plays 22, 23 minutes per game, I wouldn't be surprised to see him averaging 14, 15 points, 6 or 7 rebounds, putting himself in a position to be an all-WCC contributor and potentially challenging Zach Norvell for his spot at number 2 on this list. If Braden Huff spends 2 more years at Gonzaga and ends up becoming the guy when Graham Ike leaves, it is possible he could then challenge Jeremy Pargo for the very top of this list. But right now, he is number 3 out of 4, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's passing Zach Norvell a year from now. Last, and I was going to say, but not least, I guess in this case it is least, but it's not a bad spot to be because Malachi Smith was very good in his 1 year at Gonzaga. It's not quite the same as comparing it to Minnesota, where we had 2 great players in Jalen and Chet, and then a great player as well in Sam Dower and then Gino Crandall. But it's kind of similar in the sense of 3 guys who were very, very, very good starters, really big time contributors, and then a 4th player who was also very good, but only spent 1 year at Gonzaga and did not start in that 1 year. That's the same situation Gino was in as number 4 among the Minnesota Zags, and now it's the same position Malachi Smith is in as number 4 among the Illinois Zags. He's from Belleville, Illinois, spent 1 year at Gonzaga in the 22-23 season, had spent time at Wright State and Chattanooga prior to transferring to Gonzaga, played 37 games in a Gonzaga uniform, started just 1 of them, averaged about 9 points, 3.5 boards, and 1.5 assists. He was the West Coast Conference 6th man of the year. He scored in double figures 16 times out of his 37 games with the Zags. That included topping 20 points twice. That included a monster game against the University of Portland, where he had 27 points on 7 of 10 shooting from 3, knocked down 7 threes off the bench for Gonzaga in a game against the Pilots. Just some really fun stuff. Malachi Smith was a very easy player to root for. I fear he's going to get buried a little bit because he was only at Gonzaga for 1 year, and it was a kind of a weird, wonky season for Gonzaga. It was the year when they seemed to struggle to find a point guard all year long, and Drew Timme sort of ended up de facto playing point guard as that season went on. But Smith was a very, very good player. He's still playing professionally. He actually just got traded from the Memphis Hustle, the G League affiliate of the Memphis Grizzlies, to the Long Island Nets, who are, of course, the G League affiliate of the Brooklyn Nets. It's funny that Malachi was teammates with Drew Timme on the Wisconsin Herd last season, and now he is going to be playing for the G League affiliate for Brooklyn. I don't think Drew Timme is going to be spending any time with the Long Island Nets, but if Malachi does get the call to go play for Brooklyn, it'll be fun to see those 2 guys be teammates once again. It's going to wrap it up for me today, folks. We'll have more of these. Like I said, California, Texas, Washington, Canada, a few others will be very fun to do over the next couple of weeks. But college basketball is coming back very soon, less than 2 months until the season gets underway. We're going to have more updates for you. We're going to talk recruiting. We're going to talk roster construction, starting lineup projections, keep you up to date on all of that and more. Thanks again, folks, for making the show your first listen. And of course, as always, as we get into the weekend here coming up, I want to say go Zags.